I was standing in my small Denver apartment, hands still covered in construction dust from the restoration site, when my phone started vibrating so violently it nearly danced off the counter. 53 messages. 22 missed calls, all from people I hadn't heard from in months. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the chaos. Then I saw it. A video tagged with my sister's name, shared across every social media platform, racking up millions of views. I clicked play with trembling fingers. The footage was shaky, someone's phone camera capturing what should have been the happiest day of my sister Sarah's life. Instead, I watched in horror as her new husband Gavin's hand connected with her face in front of 300 wedding guests. The sound of that slap echoed through the grand ballroom of the Ridgewood estate. Sarah's white dress, which had cost more than my monthly rent, seemed to glow against the darkness of what was unfolding. Guests screamed. My mother's face, frozen in shock, filled the frame for just a moment before the video cut to Gavin being dragged away by groomsmen, while Sarah collapsed into bridesmaids' arms, her carefully styled hair coming undone, mascara streaming down her cheeks. I stood there, watching the worst moment of my sister's life play out on a screen, and felt absolutely nothing. No shock. No tears. No urge to rush to her side. Just a cold, hollow emptiness where my family loyalty used to live. Because here's the truth nobody wants to talk about. I wasn't at that wedding. My own sister's wedding. And it wasn't because I was busy, or forgot, or got the date wrong. I wasn't invited. But before we get to how I became persona non grata in my own family, before we talk about the mortgage fraud and the lies and the moment I finally said enough, I need you to do something for me. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or wondered why you're always the one expected to sacrifice, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because we're going to dive deep into toxic family dynamics and how to break free. And please, drop a comment sharing your own experience. You're not alone in this. I promise you that. Now, let me take you back to where this all really started. 6 months earlier, I was actually happy. Strange to say that now, looking back, but I was. At 32 years old, I had finally found my calling. After years of drifting through unfulfilling office jobs, I'd completed a certification in historic home restoration and landed an apprenticeship with Rodriguez and Associates, one of Denver's most respected restoration firms. The work was physically demanding, the pay was modest, but every day I got to bring beautiful old structures back to life. I'd arrive at job sites at dawn, work until my muscles ached, and go home feeling like I'd accomplished something real, something lasting. My days had settled into a rhythm that felt right for the first time in my adult life. I'd wake at 5:30, make strong coffee in my tiny apartment kitchen, and drive through Denver's empty pre-dawn streets to whatever historic property we were working on. That particular month, we were restoring a 1,890 Victorian in Capitol Hill, a neighborhood where grand old houses stood like elegant ghosts among newer construction. The house had been neglected for decades, passed through several owners who'd let it deteriorate, but underneath the water damage and rotting wood, you could still see the craftsmanship of a different era. Hand-carved moldings, original hardwood floors, plaster ceiling medallions that had survived 100 Colorado winters. I loved the detective work of restoration. Every morning, I'd examine the structure like a puzzle to solve. Which beams could be saved? Which ones needed replacing? How could we match modern materials to historical authenticity? My supervisor, Miguel Rodriguez, was a third-generation craftsman who'd learned the trade from his grandfather. He was patient with my questions, generous with his knowledge, and had started letting me take on more complex tasks. That morning, I was carefully removing water-damaged floorboards in the front parlor, trying to preserve as much original wood as possible. The owner wanted to maintain the home's historical integrity, which meant hours of painstaking work that I found deeply satisfying. My phone rang around 10, interrupting my concentration. I almost didn't answer. My hands were covered in plaster dust, and I was in the middle of a delicate extraction, but something made me glance at the screen. Unknown Colorado number. Usually I'd let it go to voicemail, but I'd been expecting a call from a supplier about some specialized molding we'd ordered. I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered. The voice on the other end was professional, measured, with that particular tone lawyers use when they're about to complicate your life. He introduced himself as David Chen, an attorney with Morrison Legal Group. He was calling on behalf of First Mountain Bank regarding a property at 1847 Mapleton Avenue in Boulder. I knew that address by heart. It was my childhood home, the Victorian house where I'd grown up, where my parents still lived. Mr. Chen explained that there had been some questions regarding a home equity line of credit taken out on the property several years ago. The bank was conducting a routine audit, and my name had appeared in connection with the loan documentation. He asked, very carefully, if I was aware of this HELOC and my involvement with it. A cold weight settled in my chest. I heard myself speaking, the words spilling out in a rush that sounded desperate even to my own ears. This had to be a mistake, some clerical error. I hadn't lived at that address in over a decade. I'd never put my name on any loan documents, never authorized anything. The silence on the other end of the line stretched thin and taut, like a wire about to snap. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, could feel the dust on my hands suddenly gritty and real against my palm as I gripped the phone tighter. Mr. Chen's pause lasted just 3 seconds, maybe 4, but it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, watching the ground crumble beneath my feet. Mr. Chen suggested we set up a meeting to review the paperwork in person. He could come to Denver if that was more convenient. His carefully neutral tone sent ice through my veins. This wasn't a simple clerical error. This was something serious, something that required an attorney's involvement. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near my apartment the following day, then sat back on my heels in that dusty Victorian parlor, my mind racing. My parents had always seemed financially stable. Not wealthy, but comfortable. My father Richard had worked as an aerospace engineer for Lockheed Martin for 35 years, before retiring with what I'd assumed was a decent pension. My mother Catherine had dabbled in real estate in the 80s and 90s, showing houses and earning commissions that supplemented Dad's salary. They'd bought the Boulder house in 1985, before the tech boom turned the city into one of the most expensive zip codes in America. By my calculations, that 30-year mortgage should have been paid off years ago. I tried calling my father during my lunch break, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me back, trying to keep my voice casual even though my hands were shaking. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And whatever it was, I had a sinking feeling it was about to upend my carefully reconstructed life. That evening, I couldn't focus on anything. I sat in my apartment, a cramped one-bedroom in a converted house near Sloan's Lake, and tried to make sense of what the lawyer had told me. A HELOC is essentially a second mortgage, a line of credit secured by the equity in a house. People took them out for major expenses like home renovations, medical bills, or debt consolidation. But why would my name be on my parents' HELOC? I hadn't lived with them since college. I had no legal claim to their house. My phone rang around 8. Chloe, my best friend since our sophomore year at CU Boulder. She and I had stayed close even as I drifted away from most of my college friends, too consumed by work and my increasingly complicated relationship with my family. Chloe worked in PR for a tech startup, made twice what I did, and had the kind of direct, no-nonsense personality that had saved me from my own doormat tendencies more times than I could count. The moment I answered, she launched in without preamble. Okay, what the hell is going on with your family? Have you looked at Instagram lately? Because you need to look at Instagram right now. I'd been avoiding social media for weeks. The endless scroll of other people's curated happiness depressed me, and I had better things to do with my time. But Chloe's urgency made me open the app. I navigated to my sister Sarah's profile, and my breath caught in my throat. Sarah's feed had transformed into a wedding planning extravaganza. Post after post of engagement photos I'd never seen. Sarah and some square-jawed man I didn't recognize posed against Flatiron's backdrops in downtown Boulder streets. Bridal boutique photos showing Sarah in various white gowns, my mother standing beside her with tears in her eyes. Registry announcements directing people to expensive stores I couldn't afford to shop in. Venue reveals showing the Ridgewood Estate, a luxury mountain venue that cost upwards of $50,000 just for the rental. And a countdown, 93 days until the wedding. I scrolled back through weeks of posts, my chest tightening with each swipe. There were photos from an engagement party at my parents' house. Backyard shots showing string lights and catered food and at least 40 guests, all people I knew, my aunts and uncles, cousins, family friends I'd grown up with. Everyone raising champagne glasses and celebrating this momentous occasion, an occasion I knew absolutely nothing about. The comment sections were full of congratulations and excitement. People asking about bridesmaids' dresses, people offering recommendations for photographers and florists, people tagging each other in memories and inside jokes. And nowhere, in hundreds of comments across dozens of posts, was there a single mention of me. Ellie? Chloe's voice brought me back to the phone I'd forgotten I was holding. Are you seeing this? How did you not know your sister was getting married? I couldn't form words. My throat had closed up, and there was a strange ringing in my ears. I managed to make some kind of sound, and Chloe continued, her voice sharp with protective anger. This is insane. This is beyond messed up. Your own sister, Elle. Your own parents. How could they not tell you? How could they post all of this publicly and just act like you don't exist? I found my voice, though it came out thin and strained. Who is he? Chloe was already typing. I could hear her keyboard clicking. Okay. Searching. Gavin Thorne, 37 years old, works in commercial real estate development. Has some company called Thorne Property Group. His Instagram is all gym selfies and shots of luxury cars. Oh God, Elle, he looks like such a douche. His bio literally says crushing goals and taking names. Who writes that? Under different circumstances, I might have laughed. Instead, I felt a cold numbness spreading through my chest. I clicked on Gavin's profile. Chloe was right. His feed was a testament to performative masculinity. Photos of him at CrossFit gyms, flexing. Photos of a silver BMW with a vanity plate. Photos at high-end restaurants and exclusive clubs. And recent photos with Sarah, the two of them looking like a magazine spread for aspirational living. I noticed something else too. In the photos with Sarah, Gavin's hand was always possessively placed. On her lower back, around her waist, on her thigh when they sat together. And in every shot, Sarah was looking at him with an expression I recognized from our childhood. It was the look she got when she wanted something desperately and was afraid of losing it. The look she'd had when Mom would dangle approval or privileges just out of reach, making Sarah perform for affection. I made it through the rest of the call with Chloe in a daze. She was furious on my behalf, spinning theories about what kind of family drama could explain this situation, offering to drive to Boulder and confront my parents personally. I assured her I'd handle it, though I had no idea how. After we hung up, I sat in the dark of my apartment and tried to understand what I was feeling. It wasn't just hurt, though there was plenty of that. It was a deeper, more fundamental betrayal. A realization that everything I'd believed about my place in my family had been a carefully maintained fiction. I'd always known I wasn't the favorite child. Sarah, 5 years younger, had been the baby, the princess, the one who could do no wrong in our mother's eyes. But I'd thought there was still love there. Still some basic respect and inclusion. To be excluded from my own sister's wedding, to not even be told she was engaged, meant I wasn't just less favored. I was completely expendable. I spent that night going through my own social media, looking at the breadcrumbs of my relationship with my family over the past few years. What I found was illuminating and painful. Every major family event for the last 3 years, I'd either not been invited or had been informed at the last minute, almost as an afterthought. My cousin Jessica's baby shower, Uncle Tom's retirement party, my grandmother's 80th birthday celebration. Each time, I'd told myself it was an oversight, that everyone was busy, that I was reading too much into it. Now, seeing the pattern laid out chronologically, I couldn't deny the truth. I was being systematically erased. But why? That was the question that kept me awake until 3 in the morning. What had I done to deserve this exile? I'd always been the responsible one, the helper, the problem solver. When Sarah's marriage to Eric had imploded 3 years ago, I'd been the first one there. I'd helped her move out of their house. I'd listened to hours of crying and rage and self-pity. I'd loaned her money when she said she couldn't make rent. The money. A sick feeling washed over me as I remembered. Sarah had come to me 2 years ago with a business proposal. She wanted to open a coffee shop in downtown Boulder. She had the perfect location, the perfect concept. She just needed startup capital, $22,000. She'd shown me a business plan, projections, drawings of what the space would look like. She'd promised to pay me back within 2 years, once the business was profitable. I'd emptied most of my savings account and given her the money, believing I was helping my sister achieve her dream. The coffee shop, Sarah's sanctuary, had opened with great fanfare. I'd even taken a day off work to attend the grand opening, though I'd noticed my parents barely acknowledged my presence. For 8 months, Sarah posted constantly about the shop. Artfully styled lattes, smiling customers, inspirational quotes about following your dreams. Then, abruptly, the post stopped. The shop's Instagram went dark. When I'd asked Sarah what happened, she'd been vague and defensive. The location hadn't worked out. Her business partner had been stealing. The market was saturated. It was always someone else's fault, never her poor planning or lack of experience. And she'd never mentioned paying me back, not once. When I gently brought it up 6 months after the shop closed, she'd gotten angry. "I thought that was a gift," she'd said. "Family helps family, Ellie. I can't believe you're being so mercenary about this." I'd backed off immediately, consumed with guilt for even mentioning it. That was my pattern, always backing down. Always swallowing my hurt, always trying to keep the peace. But there was more. I pulled out my laptop and logged into my bank account, going back through 2 years of statements. What I found made me physically ill. For the last 26 months, I'd been sending $500 a month to my parents. It had started after a phone call from my mother, her voice tight with stress. She'd explained that Dad's pension wasn't as much as they'd expected. There were property taxes, maintenance on the old house, medical bills. They were struggling, she said, and they didn't want to worry Sarah, who was already dealing with so much after the divorce. Could I help out? Just temporarily, until they got back on their feet? Of course I'd said yes. I was the responsible daughter, the one with steady employment. The one who didn't need as much, who didn't ask for as much, $500 a month for 26 months. $13,000 on top of the $22,000 for Sarah's failed business, $35,000 total. I'd been living on a shoestring budget for over 2 years, contributing a significant portion of my modest apprentice salary to my family, and now I wasn't even invited to my sister's obviously expensive wedding. The injustice of it hit me like a physical blow. I called in sick to work the next morning, something I'd never done before. Miguel sounded concerned, told me to take care of myself and not to worry about the job site. I spent the morning with David Chen, the attorney, reviewing documents in a corner booth of a Starbucks on Colfax. What he showed me made the previous night's discoveries look quaint by comparison. The home equity line of credit had been taken out 5 years ago, in 2018. The amount was staggering, $195,000, secured against my parents' house. The paperwork listed 3 names: Richard Thompson, Catherine Thompson, and Sarah Michelle Thompson, my sister. I stared at those signatures, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Sarah hadn't lived at that house in over a decade. She'd moved out after high school, gotten married to Eric, lived in 3 different apartments before and after the divorce. There was no legitimate reason for her name to be on this loan. Mr. Chen walked me through it carefully, his finger tracing the relevant sections of the documents. According to the loan application, all 3 applicants resided at the property. According to the bank's records, Sarah was listed as a co-borrower to strengthen the application, providing additional income verification. Her signature appeared on multiple pages of the loan agreement, on the promissory note, on the occupancy certification. "Is this her signature?" Mr. Chen asked, showing me the documents. I looked closely. It looked like Sarah's handwriting, but something was off about it. The loops were too perfect, too consistent. Sarah's actual signature was sloppier, more rushed. This looked like someone had carefully copied her style. "I don't think so," I said slowly. "I think someone forged this." Mr. Chen nodded, unsurprised. "That's what the bank suspects. There are other irregularities, too. The income documentation for your sister shows employment at a business that closed 4 months before the loan application was submitted. The utility bills submitted as proof of residency for all 3 borrowers show usage patterns consistent with only 2 people living in the home, not 3. And recently, the bank received an anonymous tip suggesting fraud." My head snapped up. An anonymous tip? From who? Mr. Chen's expression remained professionally neutral. "The bank can't disclose that information, but I can tell you that the tip included specific details about the loan that only someone with inside knowledge would have. The bank is now conducting a formal investigation. If fraud is confirmed, they can demand immediate repayment of the full loan amount. Given that there's currently about $70,000 outstanding, that would be catastrophic for your parents. They could lose the house. There could also be criminal charges for bank fraud and identity theft. And my sister? What happens to her if her signature was forged? If she can prove she didn't sign these documents and didn't benefit from the loan, she could be considered a victim. But she'd still need to cooperate fully with the investigation. Her credit could be destroyed. She could be named in civil suits. It's a complicated situation. Why are you telling me all this? What does this have to do with me?" Mr. Chen pulled out another document. This is a record of payments made on the HELOC over the past 2 years. Specifically, 26 deposits of $500 each, all made by the same person. The deposits were made through the bank's online portal, from an external account. We traced that account. It belongs to you, Miss Thompson. The coffee I'd been drinking threatened to come back up. You're saying the money I was sending to help with their mortgage was actually going to pay interest on this fraudulent loan? That's exactly what I'm saying. Your parents told you one thing, but the money was being used for something else entirely. Technically, you could be considered an unwitting participant in loan fraud, though the bank doesn't believe you had knowledge of the scheme. They're more interested in recovering their money and potentially prosecuting whoever actually committed the fraud. I sat back in the booth, my entire worldview crumbling. My parents hadn't just excluded me from family events. They'd been actively lying to me, taking my money under false pretenses, using me to prop up a financial house of cards built on forgery and deception. And through it all, they'd been planning an elaborate, expensive wedding for Sarah, the very person whose identity had been stolen to secure the fraudulent loan in the first place. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The sheer audacity of it made me want to laugh and cry and scream all at once. Mr. Chen gave me copies of everything and his card. He told me the bank would be in touch officially within the week. He also suggested I consult with my own attorney, someone who could represent my interests separately from my family's. As I left that Starbucks, documents clutched in my hand, I felt like I was walking through a dream. None of this seemed real, but I knew what I had to do next. I had to confront my parents. I had to hear them try to explain the inexplicable, and I had to do it before I lost my nerve. I drove to Boulder that afternoon, taking the highway too fast, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The route was muscle memory. I'd driven it thousands of times growing up and visiting, but today everything looked foreign and strange. The mountains rising against the western sky seemed ominous rather than beautiful. The neat streets of Boulder felt claustrophobic rather than charming. I pulled up to 1847 Mapleton Avenue and sat in my car for several minutes, staring at the house. It was a beautiful Victorian, painted in historically accurate colors, with a wraparound porch and original stained glass windows. I'd spent my entire childhood in that house. I'd learned to ride a bike on that driveway. I'd sat on that porch swing, reading books during summer vacations. I'd believed it was a sanctuary, a place of safety and belonging. Now it just looked like a lie wrapped in gingerbread trim. My father's car was in the driveway, but not my mother's Mercedes. Good. I wanted to talk to Dad alone first. He was the weaker link, more likely to tell me the truth without my mother there to control the narrative. I found him in the garage, as I'd expected. Richard had always retreated to his workshop when things got uncomfortable in the house. It was his sanctuary, filled with tools organized on pegboards, a vintage Mustang he'd been restoring for 15 years, and the smell of motor oil and sawdust. He was bent over the Mustang's engine when I walked in, and he didn't notice me at first. "Dad." He straightened quickly, turning toward me with a smile that died the moment he saw my face. "Ellie, honey, I didn't know you were coming. Is everything okay?" "No, everything is not okay." I held up the envelope of documents. "We need to talk about the HELOC. We need to talk about the $195,000 loan you and Mom took out 5 years ago. We need to talk about why Sarah's name is on it. And we need to talk about where my money has really been going." The color drained from my father's face. He glanced toward the door leading into the house, a trapped animal looking for escape routes. "Elle, this isn't a good time. Your mother is out, but she'll be back soon, and you know she doesn't like surprises. I don't care what Mom likes. I care about the truth." I blocked his path to the door. "Tell me what's going on. All of it. Right now." What came out over the next hour was worse than anything I could have imagined. Worse even than what Miss Chen had told me. My father wasn't a good liar. Under pressure, he crumbled, and once he started talking, the whole rotten story came pouring out. 5 years ago, my mother had gotten them into serious financial trouble. She'd been day trading stocks based on tips from friends and online forums, convinced she could make a fortune. Instead, she'd lost nearly $80,000. She'd also been secretly spending far beyond their means, maintaining a lifestyle that required designer clothes, expensive beauty treatments, country club memberships, and constant entertaining. She'd run up 6 different credit cards to their limits. The debt had become unmanageable. She'd hidden it from my father until a collections agency called the House threatening legal action. When Richard finally understood the scope of the problem, he'd been horrified and angry, but Catherine had a solution already planned. They owned the house free and clear. They could take out a HELOC, pay off all the debts, and start fresh. Richard had agreed, though he'd been nervous about taking on such a large loan at their age. But when they applied, the bank had concerns. Richard's pension and Social Security, combined with Catherine's sporadic real estate commissions, wasn't enough income to qualify for the amount they needed. The loan officer suggested adding a co-borrower, someone with steady employment and good credit. Catherine had suggested Sarah. Dad, Sarah didn't live here. She wasn't even in a position to co-sign anything. She was going through a divorce. She was broke. My father looked at his hands, shame written across every line of his face. Your mother handled all the paperwork. She told me Sarah had agreed to help, that she'd signed the documents, that everything was legitimate. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. I didn't ask questions I should have asked. But Sarah never signed those papers, did she? Richard's silence was answer enough. Mom forged her signature. She committed identity theft and bank fraud using her own daughter. My voice was rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. And then, when you couldn't make the payments, you came to me. You told me you were struggling with the mortgage. You let me believe I was helping you keep the house, when really I was just feeding money into Mom's fraud scheme. We were going to tell you, Richard said weakly. We were going to pay you back. It was just supposed to be temporary. Temporary? Dad, it's been over 2 years. And now Sarah is getting married, planning this massive, expensive wedding, and I'm not even invited. Do you have any idea how that feels? Do you have any concept of what you and Mom have done to me? Richard looked old suddenly, every one of his 68 years showing in the sag of his shoulders and the lines on his face. I know. God, Ellie, I know. Your mother? She has a way of making things seem reasonable at the time, and then you look back and realize how twisted it all became. The wedding, that wasn't my idea. I wanted you there. I told Catherine it was wrong to exclude you, but she said you were too busy with your apprenticeship, that you wouldn't fit in with Gavin's family, that it would be easier if you just weren't there. Easier for who? Not for me. Easier for Mom, so she doesn't have to face what she's done. Easier for Sarah, so she can pretend she didn't benefit from Mom's crimes. Sarah doesn't know, Richard said quickly, about the HELOC, about the forged signature. She really doesn't know, Elle. Your mother told her we'd gotten the loan approved on our own. Sarah thinks the coffee shop money came from us, from our savings. She has no idea her identity was used. That actually made it worse somehow. Sarah was innocent in this particular crime, which meant my exclusion from her life was pure, uncomplicated rejection. She didn't want me at her wedding because I wasn't good enough, wasn't successful enough, wasn't the kind of sister who'd make her look good in front of her new wealthy in-laws. I need all the documents. Every piece of paper related to the HELOC, every statement, every payment record, everything. And I need you to tell me the truth about where the money from the loan actually went. My father led me into his office, a converted bedroom on the first floor that smelled like old books and desperation. He pulled files from a locked cabinet, his hands shaking as he spread papers across his desk. Together, we went through 5 years of financial records, and the picture that emerged was damning. Of the $195,000 my parents had borrowed, almost none of it had been used for the stated purpose of home improvements. $40,000 had gone to paying off Catherine's credit card debts and the losses from her disastrous day trading. $30,000 had gone to Sarah, supposedly for her divorce attorney and moving expenses, though I knew Eric had actually paid for most of that. That money had likely funded Sarah's lifestyle during the months after the split, keeping her in the manner to which she'd become accustomed. Another $50,000 had been the down payment on Sarah's condo, the 2-bedroom place in a trendy Boulder neighborhood where she lived with my nephews. The loan records showed that payment going to a real estate escrow account, listed as a gift to my daughter. The remaining $75,000 had been eaten up by interest payments, penalties for missed payments, and Catherine's continued overspending. Essentially, my mother had stolen Sarah's identity to fund Sarah's lifestyle, all while excluding me from the family and taking my money to keep the scheme afloat. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. I took photos of everything with my phone. Every document, every statement, every piece of evidence. My father watched me do it with resignation, not trying to stop me. When I was done, I looked at him with something like pity. You know this is bank fraud, Dad. Mom could go to jail. You could go to jail for helping her cover it up. Sarah could lose everything if the bank decides to prosecute her as a co-conspirator. I know, he whispered. I've known for years. I've barely slept, worrying about it. But your mother keeps saying it'll be fine, that we just need to keep making payments and eventually the loan will be paid off and no one will ever know. But now the bank knows. They're investigating. And when they prove fraud, they'll want their money back immediately. Can you pay off $70,000 right now? Richard shook his head miserably. We don't have it. We don't have anything. We're drowning, Ellie. We've been drowning for years. I left that office with my phone full of evidence and my heart full of something colder than anger. It was a kind of clarity, a recognition that I'd been living in a fantasy. I'd believed my family loved me, even if they didn't show it well. I believed there was some fundamental bond that connected us. But looking at these documents, seeing the systematic way I'd been used and excluded and lied to, I understood the truth. I was a resource to them, a bank account with legs, someone to exploit when needed and discard when convenient. I found my father back in the garage, sitting on a stool beside his half-restored Mustang, his head in his hands. I felt like I should say something, offer some comfort or at least a goodbye. But I had nothing left to give. I walked past him to my car and drove back to Denver in silence. That evening, Chloe came over without being asked, somehow sensing I needed her. She brought wine and Thai food and her fierce, protective love. I showed her everything, the photos of documents, the timeline of lies, the full scope of my family's betrayal. She listened and swore creative profanity and held my hand while I cried angry, frustrated tears. "You're reporting them, right?" Chloe's voice was steel. "You're going to the police, to the bank, to whoever will listen. They stole from you. Elle. They committed fraud. They deserve to face consequences." "I don't know," I said honestly. "If I report them, Mom and Dad lose everything. They could actually go to jail. Sarah could be implicated even though she didn't know. My nephews could end up in foster care if both their mom and grandparents are in legal trouble. Can I really do that? Can you really not?" Chloe countered. "They've been using you for years. They excluded you from your own sister's wedding while taking your money. They lied about everything. At what point do consequences become necessary?" She was right, of course. But knowing someone is right and being ready to pull the trigger on destroying your family are two very different things. I told Chloe I needed time to think, to process, to figure out my next move. She made me promise not to send them any more money, not to let them guilt me into backing down. I promised, and I meant it. That night, I lay awake in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything I'd learned. And slowly, through the hurt and anger, a plan began to form. I wasn't going to report them. Not yet. But I wasn't going to be their victim anymore either. I was going to protect myself, document everything, and prepare for whatever came next. The next morning, I consulted with my own attorney. Patricia Winters was a family law specialist who'd been recommended by a coworker. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, with a reputation for taking no prisoners in court. I laid out the entire situation for her, showing her all my documentation. She reviewed everything carefully, occasionally making notes, her expression growing more concerned as she read. When she finished, she looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and professional assessment. "Miss Thompson, you have grounds for several legal actions. You could sue your parents for fraud and seek to recover your $35,000. You could report the HELOC fraud to the bank and law enforcement. You could seek restitution through criminal proceedings. The question is, what do you actually want to happen here? I want my money back. I want them to acknowledge what they did was wrong. I want to stop being treated like a second-class member of my own family. But I don't necessarily want to destroy them." Patricia nodded slowly. "That's understandable. Family situations like this are complex. My advice would be to stop all financial support immediately. Document everything going forward, and wait to see how they respond. Often, when the money stops flowing, toxic family members reveal their true priorities. Once we see how they react, we can decide on the best legal strategy." I followed her advice. I called my bank and stopped the automatic monthly transfer to my parents. I called my mother and left a voicemail stating clearly that I would no longer be sending money and that we needed to have a family meeting to discuss the HELOC situation. Then I blocked their numbers temporarily, not ready for the barrage of manipulation that was sure to follow. I threw myself into work, staying late at job sites, taking on extra projects, anything to keep my mind occupied. Miguel noticed my increased dedication and started giving me more responsibility, which I welcomed. There was something therapeutic about restoration work. Taking broken things and making them whole again, finding beauty beneath layers of damage and neglect. If only human relationships could be restored as cleanly as Victorian architecture. 3 weeks passed. My parents tried calling repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. First confusion. Why had the payment stopped? Was I okay? Then concern. They really needed that money. They were counting on it. Then guilt. How could I abandon them like this? After everything they'd done for me? I deleted the messages without listening to most of them. Sarah called too, though less frequently. Her messages were different, confused and hurt rather than manipulative. She wanted to know why I was angry, what she'd done wrong, why I was avoiding the family. She mentioned the wedding once, saying she'd love for me to be there if I could make it, but she understood I was busy. The casual way she phrased it, the assumption that my absence was my choice rather than their exclusion, made me want to throw my phone across the room. Then Chloe called with news that changed everything. "Remember when I mentioned I had a colleague who knew something about Sarah's fiancé?" she said. "Well, I did some digging. Actually, I had her do some digging. And Ellie, you need to see what she found." 20 minutes later, Chloe was at my apartment with a laptop and a grim expression. She pulled up Facebook, Instagram, and several other social media profiles belonging to Gavin Thorne and his associates. She'd spent the past week doing reconnaissance, following leads, building a picture of who this man really was. Gavin Thorne was 37 years old, as advertised. He did run a company called Thorne Property Group, but his business was not the thriving empire his Instagram suggested. Chloe had found public records showing 3 lawsuits against Thorne Property Group in the past 18 months, all from contractors or investors claiming breach of contract and unpaid debts. The company had been named in 2 liens on properties in Douglas County. There were complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau. The picture that emerged was of a man who overpromised, underdelivered, and left trails of angry creditors in his wake. But that wasn't the worst of it. Chloe had found Gavin's less public social media profiles, the ones he apparently thought were locked down. Photos from bars and clubs across Denver and Boulder. Photos with various women, his body language in those shots ranging from friendly to intimate. And most damningly, photos from just 3 weeks ago showing Gavin with his arm around a blonde woman at the Bitter End Tavern, a dive bar in Denver's Baker neighborhood. "Who is she?" I asked, staring at the woman's face. She was pretty in a generic way, mid-30s, dressed for a night out. Chloe clicked to another profile. Ashley Patterson. Works as a paralegal at a firm downtown. And according to her Instagram, which is not locked down because people are idiots, she's been seeing someone special for the past 8 months. She doesn't name him, but look at the timeline of her posts versus his. They're at the same places, same times, from different angles. She was right. You could see it once you looked. Ashley at a restaurant, Gavin at the same restaurant hours later. Ashley at a Rockies game, Gavin posting from Coors Field the same day. Ashley at Red Rocks, Gavin at Red Rocks. The timeline of their relationship ran right alongside Gavin's courtship and engagement to Sarah. "He's cheating on her," I said flatly. "He's been cheating on her the entire time. Looks like it. And given how many people seem to know both of them, there's no way this is a secret. Someone at that wedding is going to know. This whole thing is a disaster waiting to happen." I stared at the photos, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to immediately call Sarah, to warn her, to save her from making a terrible mistake. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt and excluded and used, wondered why I should bother. They'd made it clear I wasn't part of this family. Why should I try to protect them from their own choices? "You're going to tell her, right?" Chloe was watching my face carefully. "Elle, whatever else is going on, she's still your sister. You can't let her marry this guy without knowing the truth. Can't I?" I heard the bitterness in my own voice. "I'm not invited to the wedding, Chloe. I'm not part of her life. Maybe she deserves to find out the hard way that her Prince Charming is actually a broke con artist with a girlfriend on the side. You don't mean that." She was right. I didn't mean it. Whatever anger I felt towards Sarah, however much she'd hurt me, I couldn't sit by and watch her walk into a disaster. But I also couldn't stomach the thought of directly intervening, of inserting myself into a situation where I'd clearly been told I wasn't wanted, so I made a decision that felt like a compromise. I hired a private investigator. James Miller ran a small investigative firm in Denver, specializing in infidelity cases and background checks. He was a former police detective, came highly recommended, and charged rates that made my stomach hurt. But I'd been saving the $500 a month I usually sent to my parents, and I had enough for a week of surveillance. I gave Miller everything. Gavin's information, Ashley's information, the timeline Chloe had built, the locations they both frequented. I asked him to document whatever he could find. If Gavin was cheating, I wanted proof. Not rumors or circumstantial social media posts, but actual evidence that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. Miller delivered his report 3 days before the wedding. It was comprehensive, professional, and absolutely damning. He'd followed Gavin for 5 days, documenting his movements with photos, videos, and detailed notes. The report ran to 23 pages, but the highlights were devastating. Gavin Thorne was definitely having an affair with Ashley Patterson. They met at least twice during the surveillance period, once at her apartment in Capitol Hill, where he stayed for 4 hours in the middle of the day, and once at a restaurant in Cherry Creek where they sat in a corner booth for 2 hours, his hand on her thigh the entire time. Miller had video of them kissing in the parking lot afterward. Gavin's hand tangled in Ashley's blonde hair, both of them laughing. The report also documented Gavin's financial situation, which Miller had investigated through public records and industry contacts. Thorne Property Group was indeed on the verge of bankruptcy. The company owed over $200,000 to various creditors. Gavin personally was facing 3 lawsuits. His silver BMW was leased, not owned. His fancy apartment was 2 months behind on rent. Everything about his lifestyle was leveraged and artificial, a performance of success with nothing backing it up. Miller's professional opinion, stated clearly in the report, was that Gavin Thorne was what investigators called a lifestyle predator. Someone who targeted women with money or family connections, using charm and the appearance of success to secure financial stability through relationships. Given that Sarah's family owned a valuable property in Boulder, and given that Sarah had no idea about her fiancé's real financial situation, Miller's assessment was clear. This was not a love match. This was a calculated move by a failing businessman to secure a financial lifeline. I sat in my apartment with that report, feeling sick. My sister was about to marry a con artist. A man who was actively cheating on her, lying to her, using her, and she had no idea. The vindictive part of me wanted to send this report to everyone, to blast it across social media, to make sure Gavin's fraud was as public as his performance had been. But another part of me, the part that still remembered loving my sister, that still remembered being the big sister who protected her, couldn't quite cross that line. In the end, I decided to give Sarah a choice. I had Miller's report packaged professionally, no identifying information about who had commissioned it, just the facts and evidence. I had it sent to Sarah's address 3 days before the wedding, with a typed note that simply said, "You deserve to know the truth about who you're marrying. What you do with this information is your choice." The package was delivered on a Thursday. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday. I spent those days in agonized limbo, wondering if Sarah would even open it, whether she'd believe the evidence, what she would decide to do. My phone stayed silent. No calls from Sarah or my parents. No indication that the bomb I'd sent had detonated. Part of me hoped she'd call off the wedding. Part of me hoped she'd confront Gavin and he'd confess, and they'd postpone things to work through his betrayal and deceit. Part of me even hoped she'd somehow explain it all away, that there was some innocent reason for everything Miller had documented, though I knew that was impossible. But I never imagined she'd go through with the wedding anyway. Saturday arrived. I'd been invited to work on a restoration project in 5 Points, a 1,920 seconds bungalow that needed significant work. I accepted the overtime shift gratefully, needing something physical to do, something to keep my hands and mind occupied while my sister married a man who was using her. I worked until my muscles screamed, stripping wallpaper, pulling up damaged subflooring, losing myself in the repetitive physical labor. My phone stayed in my bag all day, turned off. I didn't want to see social media updates from the wedding, didn't want to see my family celebrating while I was excluded, didn't want to know if Sarah had ignored the evidence I'd sent her. I got home around 7 in the evening, exhausted and covered in wallpaper paste and plaster dust. My apartment felt like a sanctuary, quiet and dim and mine. I dropped my bag by the door, pulled out my phone, and turned it on to check if Miguel had texted about Monday's work schedule. The notifications came flooding in like a tsunami. 53 messages, 22 missed calls, social media alerts, texts from numbers I didn't recognize, voicemails from friends I hadn't talked to in months. Something had happened. Something big. I opened Instagram first, my hands already shaking. The first thing I saw was a video, shared and reshared across multiple accounts, tagged with number Ridgewood Wedding and number Wedding Disaster. It had been posted 4 hours ago, and already had over 1 million views. I clicked play with trembling fingers. The video was shaky, shot on someone's phone from across a large room. It was clearly the reception at the Ridgewood estate. I could see the elegant mountain venue with its floor-to-ceiling windows showing aspen forests outside. The dance floor was cleared, and in the center of it stood my sister and Gavin, both in their wedding attire but definitely not dancing. Sarah's voice came through first, loud and sharp, cutting across ambient noise. "Everyone knows, Gavin. Everyone here knows what you've been doing. Did you really think you could hide it?" Gavin's face was red, angry, his hands gesturing wildly. "You set me up. You had someone spying on me. What kind of crazy paranoid psycho does that?" The phone camera zoomed in unsteadily. I could see my sister's face now, pale and tight with fury. The kind who received a 23-page report with photos and videos of her fiancé cheating. The kind who gave you a chance to come clean 3 days ago, and you swore it was all a misunderstanding. You swore you'd ended it with her. You promised me, Gavin. Around them, wedding guests were frozen, a circle of shocked faces watching the disaster unfold. I could see my mother in the background, one hand pressed to her mouth, her face pale. My father was trying to push through the crowd, probably to intervene. My Aunt Rosa stood with a group of family members, all of them transfixed by the scene. Gavin's voice rose. "This is insane! You can't humiliate me like this in front of everyone." "Humiliate you?" Sarah's laugh was bitter and slightly hysterical. "You humiliated yourself, Gavin. I humiliated myself by believing you. By planning this wedding, by introducing you to everyone I know, by thinking you actually loved me and not just my family's house." Gavin grabbed Sarah's arm, his fingers digging in hard enough that she gasped. The camera shook as the person filming jerked forward. Several men in the crowd moved toward them. And then Sarah shoved Gavin away, using both hands against his chest, her white dress flaring as she pushed. Gavin stumbled backward, caught himself, and his face twisted into something ugly. Years of maintaining a charming facade shattered in that instant. His hand came up fast and connected with Sarah's face with a crack that was audible even on the phone video. The sound of 300 people gasping in unison was almost louder than the slap itself. Sarah went down, not from the force of the hit but from pure shock, her knees buckling. Her bridesmaids rushed forward, catching her before she hit the ground, and chaos erupted. Gavin was immediately swarmed by groomsmen and male guests, all of them shouting and grabbing at him. My mother was screaming, a high-pitched wail of horror. My father had broken through the crowd and was shoving people aside to get to Sarah. Someone yelled about calling the police. The video cut off as the phone was jostled in the chaos, leaving only a blur and muffled shouting. I sat frozen on my couch, phone still in my hand, watching the worst moment of my sister's life reduced to viral content. I scrolled through my notifications and found it posted everywhere, from multiple angles, by multiple guests. Someone had live-streamed the whole thing on Facebook. Other people had captured it from different spots in the room. There were already news articles. Local news stations had picked it up. Entertainment gossip sites were running with headlines like "Luxury Wedding Ends in Assault" and "Groom Attacks Bride at Reception." Ina said. My phone rang. Catherine. I stared at her name on the screen, my finger hovering over the answer button, then hitting decline instead. It rang again immediately. Decline. It rang a third time, and this time I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message, Catherine's voice nearly incoherent with hysteria. "Ellie, you have to come. Sarah's at Boulder Community Hospital. She's asking for you. Please, please. I know we've had our issues. I know you're angry about the wedding, but your sister needs you. She needs her family. Please come." I deleted the message and turned off my phone. I know how that sounds. I know it makes me seem heartless. My sister had just been assaulted in front of hundreds of people, humiliated on what should have been her wedding day, and I was refusing to answer my mother's calls. But as I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This disaster wasn't my responsibility to fix. I hadn't been invited to be part of Sarah's life. I'd been explicitly excluded from her wedding, deemed not good enough to witness her supposedly perfect day. I'd sent her evidence of Gavin's betrayal, giving her the information she needed to protect herself, and she'd chosen to go through with the wedding anyway. She'd made her choices. Now she had to live with the consequences. I felt terrible for what had happened to her. Nobody deserved to be assaulted. But I also recognized that rushing to her side now would only enable the same patterns that had damaged me for years. I'd play the role of rescuer, smooth everything over, help clean up the mess, and nothing would fundamentally change. I'd still be the expendable daughter, the one they used when convenient and discarded when not. So I stayed home. I took a long shower, washing away the construction dust and the emotional weight of the day. I made myself dinner, simple pasta with vegetables. I sat on my small balcony and watched the city lights of Denver spread out below me, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The next morning, my phone was still flooded with messages. I scrolled through them methodically. Friends from college asking if I was okay, if I'd seen the video. Distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly interested in my family's drama. Reporters wanting comments. Even a few people I didn't know, having found my contact information somehow, wanting the inside story. I deleted most of them without reading, but there was one message that caught my attention, from Patricia Winters, my attorney. Miss Thompson, I've seen the news coverage of your sister's wedding. I imagine your family will be reaching out for support. Before you respond to them, I strongly advise we schedule a meeting to discuss your options and establish clear boundaries. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Smart woman. She understood the dynamics at play, the likelihood that my family would try to pull me back in now that they were facing consequences for their choices. I called her back and scheduled an appointment for Monday morning. The rest of Sunday passed in a strange sort of limbo. I ignored my phone except to text Chloe and Miguel. Chloe wanted to come over, to debrief everything that had happened, but I asked for space. I needed time to process, to figure out what I was feeling beneath the numbness. Monday morning, I met with Patricia. She'd done her homework over the weekend, pulling public records and news coverage, building a timeline. She laid it out for me on her conference table like a case file. Your family is facing multiple crises simultaneously, she said. The wedding disaster, which is generating ongoing media attention. The HELOC fraud investigation, which First Mountain Bank is pursuing actively, and now, potentially, assault charges against Mr. Thorne. All of this creates legal and financial exposure for your parents and sister, and they're going to want me to help them through it, I said. Patricia nodded. They're going to want money, emotional support, and most likely, they'll want you to provide a character witness if the bank fraud proceeds to criminal charges. They may even ask you to take on financial responsibility for the HELOC, arguing that you were making payments anyway, so you might as well help them settle the debt. Over my dead body. Good. Patricia smiled slightly. That's the attitude you need to maintain. Now, here's what I recommend. We draw up a formal letter establishing your boundaries. You are not responsible for their debts. You will not be providing any further financial support. You are willing to meet with them once, with me present, to discuss a path forward, but only if certain conditions are met. What conditions? They need to acknowledge, in writing, that they lied to you about how your money was being used. They need to provide a full accounting of the HELOC funds and where they went. And they need to present a plan for repaying you the $35,000 you provided, without expecting you to forgive the debt or contribute additional money to their situation. And if they refuse, then you walk away. You've documented everything. You've protected yourself legally. You owe them nothing more. It sounded harsh when stated so plainly, but it also sounded right. For the first time in my life, I was putting myself first, establishing boundaries, refusing to be the one who fixed everything at my own expense. Patricia drafted the letter that day. It was professionally worded but firm, laying out exactly what I would and wouldn't do. She sent it to my parents' house via certified mail and also emailed it to them. Then we waited. The response came faster than expected. Tuesday evening, my father called. I let it go to voicemail, following Patricia's advice. His message was brief and broken. Ellie. Honey. Please. Your mother and I need to talk to you. Sarah is devastated. She's been asking for you. We got the letter from your lawyer, and we understand you're angry. We want to make this right. Please give us a chance to explain everything. Please don't shut us out. I listened to the message 3 times, analyzing every word. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Just appeals to emotion and vague promises to make things right. Classic manipulation. I called Patricia and played her the message. She was unsurprised. They're testing you, she said, seeing if emotional appeals will override your boundaries. Hold firm. Make them meet your conditions. So I did. I sent a brief text to my father. I received your message. I'm willing to meet once, with my attorney present, if you fulfill the conditions in the letter we sent. Until then, please respect my boundaries. His response was immediate. Wednesday afternoon? At your lawyer's office? Please, Ellie, we need to resolve this. I confirmed the meeting, then spent Tuesday night preparing mentally for what was coming. Chloe came over with pizza and moral support. Remember, she said, you don't owe them anything. You're not the bad guy here. They created this situation. They lied to you. They used you. You're just protecting yourself. Wednesday afternoon arrived too quickly. I met Patricia at her office an hour early, going over our strategy. She'd be doing most of the talking, keeping the conversation focused on facts and solutions rather than emotions and blame. My job was to stay calm, stick to our boundaries, and not let them manipulate me into backing down. My parents arrived exactly on time. My mother walked in first, and I barely recognized her. Catherine had always been impeccably put together, her appearance armor against the world. Today, she looked smaller somehow, older. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes. She was wearing a simple blouse and slacks instead of her usual designer outfits. My father followed her, looking haggard and defeated. They'd brought Sarah. My sister stood in the doorway of Patricia's conference room, and my breath caught. She'd lost weight. Her face was drawn and pale, and there was a fading bruise on her left cheek where Gavin had struck her. She wore sunglasses indoors, probably to hide her eyes, and she wouldn't look directly at me. Behind them was my Aunt Rosa, who must have come as emotional support. She gave me a small, sad smile that conveyed both sympathy and disapproval, as if to say, I understand why you're doing this, but I wish you weren't. Patricia gestured everyone to seats around the conference table. The room felt too small suddenly, the air thick with tension and unspoken accusations. We sat in silence for a long moment, everyone waiting for someone else to start. Patricia spoke first, her voice professionally neutral. Thank you all for coming. As you know from my letter, Miss Thompson is willing to discuss a path forward, but only under certain conditions. Before we proceed, I need to confirm that you're prepared to meet those conditions. Catherine's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked like she wanted to argue, to take control of the conversation, to redirect everything into emotional appeals and guilt trips. But my father put a hand on her arm, and she subsided. Richard cleared his throat. We brought documentation, everything you asked for. Bank statements, loan paperwork, records of where the money went. He slid a thick folder across the table to Patricia. My attorney took her time reviewing the documents, occasionally making notes, while the rest of us sat in uncomfortable silence. I could feel my mother's eyes on me, but I kept my gaze fixed on Patricia's hands as she turned pages. Sarah spoke suddenly, her voice small and broken. Elle, I'm so sorry. About everything. About the wedding, about not inviting you, about what Mom did with the loan. I swear I didn't know. About any of it. I looked at her then, really looked at her. My little sister, who'd always been the princess. The favorite. The one who could do no wrong. She looked shattered. Whatever fantasy she'd been living had crumbled completely. Did you read the report I sent you? I asked, my voice quiet. The one about Gavin? Sarah nodded miserably. I read it. I confronted him. He said it was all lies, that someone was trying to sabotage us. He said Ashley was just a colleague, that the photos were taken out of context. He was so convincing, Elle, and Mom kept saying we should go through with the wedding anyway. That cold feet was normal, that successful marriages require trust and forgiveness. I looked at Catherine, who had the grace to look away. You knew he was cheating, and you still pushed her to marry him? I didn't know, Catherine said defensively. I thought it was just wedding jitters. Sarah was so stressed, seeing problems everywhere. I thought if she just got through the ceremony, everything would settle down. Or you thought if she married him, it would solve your financial problems. I said flatly. Gavin comes from money, or at least appears to. A rich son-in-law would be useful when the bank comes calling about your fraud. The room went silent. Patricia made a note on her legal pad but said nothing. Richard finally spoke, his voice heavy with guilt. Ellie's right. Your mother and I discussed it. We thought if Sarah married into a wealthy family, they might help us if the HELOC situation became critical. It was wrong. We were thinking about ourselves, not about Sarah's well-being. Catherine's facade cracked. We were desperate. We're going to lose the house. The bank is threatening criminal charges. I made mistakes, yes, but I was trying to protect this family. Everything I've done has been to keep us together, to keep us safe. By forging documents? My voice was cold. By stealing Sarah's identity? By lying to me about where my money was going? That's not protection, Mom. That's fraud. That's abuse. Don't you dare call me abusive. Catherine's voice rose, her face flushing with anger. I gave you everything growing up. I sacrificed for you girls. And this is how you repay me? By hiring lawyers and throwing my mistakes in my face? Patricia intervened smoothly. Mrs. Thompson, I understand emotions are running high, but we're here to find solutions, not to assign blame. Let's focus on the facts. According to these documents, of the $195,000 HELOC, approximately $70,000 remains outstanding. Is that correct? Richard nodded wearily. Yes, we've been making minimum payments, but the interest keeps accumulating. At this rate, we'll never pay it off. And according to Miss Health Thompson's records, she contributed $35,000 over 26 months, money she was told would help with mortgage payments but actually went toward this HELOC? Yes, my father admitted quietly. Patricia looked at me, a silent question. This was the moment, the decision point. I could walk away, let them face the consequences alone. I could report them to law enforcement, watch my mother potentially go to jail, or I could offer a solution that protected me while giving them a path forward. I thought about Sarah, about Emma and Lucas, about the innocent people who would suffer if I chose vengeance over resolution. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to be the good daughter, the helper, the fixer, and I realized I could be done with all of it. Not by destroying them, but by establishing clear boundaries and walking away. Here's what I'll agree to, I said, my voice steady. The side lot. The undeveloped parcel of land that's part of the property at 1847 Mapleton. You'll sell it. According to current Boulder real estate values, that lot is worth between $90,000 and $100,000. The proceeds from that sale will be split 3 ways. $35,000 to me, as repayment for what I contributed under false pretenses. $70,000 to the bank, to pay off the remaining HELOC balance. Whatever is left goes to you. Catherine started to object, but I held up a hand. I'm not finished. In exchange for this solution, you'll sign documents absolving me of any connection to the HELOC fraud. You'll make a sworn statement that I had no knowledge of the loan's true nature, that I was deceived about how my contributions were being used. And going forward, you'll expect nothing from me financially. No loans, no gifts, no bailouts. We're done. Done? My mother's voice was shrill. You're abandoning your family? No, you abandoned me, for years. You excluded me from family events while taking my money. You forged your own daughter's signature and committed bank fraud. You pushed Sarah to marry a man you knew was wrong for her because it served your financial interests. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just refusing to be used anymore. Sarah was crying quietly, tears running down her face. What about us? She whispered. What about me and you, Elle? Are we done too? I looked at my sister, and my heart ached, but I also knew I couldn't fix her, couldn't rescue her, couldn't continue the pattern that had defined our relationship for so long. That's up to you, Sarah. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be honest. No more mom mediating every interaction, no more using me as a bank account, no more taking without giving. We'd have to start over, as equals, and I'm not sure you're ready for that. I want to try, Sarah said immediately. I want to be better, to stand on my own, to be a real sister, not just someone who takes. I want to try, Elle. Please. I nodded slowly. Then start by getting your own place. Not the condo mom bought with the HELOC money. Get a place you pay for yourself. Get a job. Multiple jobs if you have to. Take care of your kids without mom's interference. Prove to yourself that you can be independent. And then, maybe, we can rebuild something. The meeting lasted another hour, Patricia working out the specific legal details. My parents would list the side lot immediately. I would provide a formal statement to the bank about my lack of knowledge regarding the HELOC fraud, which would help shield me from any legal consequences, while also undermining my mother's defense if criminal charges were filed. We'd have no contact during the sale process except through our attorneys. When we finally stood to leave, my mother made one last attempt at manipulation. She reached for me, tears in her eyes. Ellie, please, you're my daughter. I love you. Don't do this to our family. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. No, Mom, I'm not doing anything to our family. You did this. You made these choices. Now you get to live with them. I'm just choosing to live with my consequences instead of yours. I walked out of that conference room with Patricia beside me and my Aunt Rosa catching up to hug me in the hallway. I'm proud of you, Rosa whispered. It takes courage to set boundaries. More courage than you know. The side lot went on the market 3 days later. Boulder real estate being what it was, there were multiple offers within a week. A developer won the bidding at $97,000. The sale closed in less than a month. I met my father one more time, at the title company, to sign the final document splitting the proceeds. Catherine refused to attend, sending her signature via notary. Sarah came but stayed silent, signing where she was told and leaving immediately after. The whole process took less than 20 minutes. When the check for $35,000 was deposited into my account, I felt oddly hollow. This was supposed to be justice, restitution, getting back what was taken from me. But it just felt like the end of something, like watching a building I'd tried so hard to preserve finally collapse beyond repair. The weeks that followed were strange. I threw myself into work, taking on a lead role in the Highlands restoration project Miguel had offered me. The promotion came with better pay and more responsibility, and I welcomed both. I needed something to focus on, something to build, something that had clear rules and measurable progress. My family's drama continued playing out in the background. The video from Sarah's wedding had been viewed over 5 million times across various platforms. Gavin had been charged with assault. The tabloids and local news ran stories for weeks. My mother became something of a local cautionary tale. The society woman whose daughter's wedding had ended in disaster. The bank completed its fraud investigation and presented its findings to the district attorney. Catherine was facing potential criminal charges for mortgage fraud, forgery, and identity theft. My father, as a knowing accomplice, could face charges too, though the DA seemed more interested in prosecuting my mother. Sarah, after cooperating fully with the investigation and proving she'd been a victim of identity theft, was cleared of any wrongdoing. Through it all, I maintained my boundaries. No contact except through attorneys, no financial support, no emotional rescuing. It was harder than I'd expected. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I was doing the right thing, if I was being too harsh, if blood should mean more than it apparently did to me now. Chloe kept me grounded. "You're not being harsh," she'd remind me. "You're being healthy. There's a difference." Dr. Martinez, my therapist, helped me process the grief. Because that's what it was, I realized. Grief, not for the family I was losing, but for the family I'd never actually had. The fantasy version where parents protected their children and siblings looked out for each other, where love wasn't conditional on usefulness and acceptance didn't come with a price tag. 4 months after the title company meeting, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Elle?" Sarah's voice was different. Steadier, maybe. Less of that wheedling neediness that had characterized so many of our conversations over the years. "Hi, Sarah. I wanted to let you know. I got a job. Actually, I got 3 jobs. I'm working full-time as an office manager at a pediatric clinic, and I picked up 2 part-time gigs doing bookkeeping and social media management for small businesses. It's exhausting, but I'm doing it. I'm paying my own bills, taking care of the kids without mom's interference." "That's good," I said carefully, not sure where this was going. "I moved too, out of the condo, into a smaller apartment that I can actually afford on my own. It's not fancy, but it's mine. Emma and Lucas share a room, and we're making it work. We're making it all work." There was pride in her voice, real pride, the kind that comes from genuine accomplishment rather than performance. It made something in my chest loosen just slightly. "I'm glad," I said, and meant it. "I wanted to thank you. For sending that report about Gavin, for trying to protect me even when I'd been terrible to you. For not giving up on me completely even though I would have deserved it if you had." We talked for an hour, really talked, maybe for the first time in our adult lives. Sarah told me about the shame of the viral video, about the stares and whispers she'd endured for weeks afterward, about how she'd finally started therapy and was beginning to understand how toxic our mother's influence had been, about how she'd joined a support group for domestic violence survivors, even though Gavin's assault had been a single incident, because she'd realized she'd been accepting emotional abuse as normal her whole life. "I'm beginning to see it now," Sarah said quietly. "How Mom pitted us against each other. How she made everything a competition. How love in our house was always conditional on being useful or impressive or whatever she needed at the moment. I'm beginning to understand what you tried to tell me for years." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was acknowledgement. It was a start. A week later, Sarah showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there with a small wooden box in her hands. "I wanted to give you something," she said. "Dad found this when they were cleaning out the attic. He wanted you to have it." Inside the box was our grandfather's pocket watch, a beautiful antique timepiece I'd admired my entire childhood. It had disappeared years ago, and I'd assumed it had been sold or lost. The weight of it in my palm felt significant, like reclaiming a piece of my history that had been taken from me. "Thank you," I said quietly. We sat on my small balcony, drinking coffee and watching the Denver skyline catch the evening light. Sarah told me about Emma's progress in school, about Lucas's new obsession with dinosaurs, about the tiny apartment they'd turned into a home with creativity and determination. She showed me pictures on her phone, and I saw something familiar in them. The same threadbare but proud independence I remembered from my own early years living on my own. Before she left, Sarah pressed an envelope into my hand. "Don't open it until I'm gone." Inside was a check for $500 and a handwritten note, the first of 70 payments. "I'll send one every month until I've paid you back everything. I know you said not to, but I need to do this. For me, not just for you. I need to know I can keep a promise. Thank you for showing me what it looks like to have boundaries and self-respect. I'm still learning, but I'm trying." I stood in my doorway holding that check and letter, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt something like hope for my sister. My relationship with my parents remained fractured. Richard called occasionally, awkward conversations, where he tried to check in without acknowledging the magnitude of what had happened. Catherine and I didn't speak at all. Rosa told me my mother blamed me for everything, had spun an elaborate narrative where I was the ungrateful daughter who'd betrayed the family. It hurt less than I expected. 6 months after everything fell apart, I bought a house. Nothing fancy, just a 1,930 seconds bungalow in Edgewater that needed work, but it was mine, all mine. I spent weekends slowly restoring it, using all the skills I'd learned, taking satisfaction in every repaired window and refinished floor. One evening, about 8 months after that final family confrontation, I sat on my front porch swing watching the sunset. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Just a picture of Emma and Lucas grinning at the camera, covered in flour from an apparent baking disaster. The caption read, "Learning to make cookies without a safety net. How did you survive us being this messy?" I smiled and typed back, "One disaster at a time. They're lucky to have you." Her response was almost immediate. "I'm lucky you didn't give up on me completely." I set down my phone and opened my journal. I turned to a fresh page and wrote, "The sweetest revenge is peace and quiet. Not vindication. Not watching them suffer. Not even getting my money back. Just this. Sitting on my own porch, in my own house, living my own life. No longer carrying the weight of other people's choices and failures. This is freedom. This is what choosing myself looks like." I closed the journal and sat there as the light faded, feeling the evening breeze on my face, hearing the sounds of my neighborhood settling into night. Somewhere in Boulder, my parents were living with the consequences of their actions. Somewhere in Denver, Sarah was building a life based on her own strength rather than other people's money or approval. And here I was, finally learning what it meant to live authentically, to set boundaries, to understand that love without respect isn't really love at all. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no moment where everyone suddenly saw the error of their ways and begged for my forgiveness. Real life doesn't work like that. Real healing is messy and slow and sometimes incomplete. But sitting there on my porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, I realized I didn't need a fairy tale ending. I just needed this. The quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd chosen myself, protected myself, and built a life I didn't need to escape from. Time doesn't erase mistakes, but it teaches us when to stop repeating them. I'd spent 32 years learning to be what my family needed me to be. It had taken pain, betrayal, and public humiliation to finally teach me the most important lesson. The only person I really needed to be was myself. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. So here's my question for you. Have you ever been the person everyone leans on but no one shows up for? Have you given until you had nothing left, only to be excluded when it mattered most? Have you stayed silent about family dysfunction because speaking up would make you the villain? You're not alone. Your feelings are valid. Your boundaries matter. And choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. Drop a comment and share your story. Hit that like button if this resonated with you. And subscribe because we're going to keep talking about what it really takes to break free from toxic family dynamics and build a life you don't need to recover from. Remember, the sweetest revenge is the life you build when you finally stop letting other people write your story.